Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and I am here with the scholars from the edge of time, Nicholas Diak and Michele Brittany, and I am ready to expand my mind and soak in esoteric sword and sandal and sword and sorcery knowledge. Greetings and welcome, oh scholars. How are you on this wonderful day?
Greetings, Hercules. Doing very well on a hot Arizona night. Resurgent of the heat wave that is gracing its presence on us this week.
It's been toasty. It's been toasty.
It's been warm. So
Here yesterday it got nice and cool. Right now I have the air conditioner on full blast because it's just so hot.
uh yeah, we had a super hot summer. I think it was like 100 and some odd consecutive days of heat over 100. And then last week it cooled way off, like, this is nice. And then this week it strikes back, part two. So
yeah, yesterday was 107. It was slightly cooler today. But I think after this week, maybe we are actually going to be in some cooler weather. Fingers are crossed. So,
And I want to thank Michele for being on a premiere episode of Sword and Sorcery Cinema.
oh, you're welcome. Yes, and I feel like Krull is a continuation of our conversation
Yes.
on Monday. So it'll be fun to talk about.
spoiler, people now know what we're going to talk about.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I spoiled it on Monday too.
Oh, that's
so.
right. Oh, and of course, the YouTube description will say it.
Yeah, and I put a picture of Krull on
So the only person that's been spoiled is me.
Yes. Only you. But you have a torch to light your way now.
So, Michele, anything cool been going on in your world lately?
Um,
Aside
no.
from appearing on Hercules's inaugural program?
No, that was a big deal. And it was nice to be part of that. Other than that, continuing to work on the edited collection of critical essays on the Mummy, specifically stemming from the 1999 Universal version. So into second round edits, and I think in about another week we'll be starting to put together the manuscript and
oh wow,
putting that all together to send off to the publisher by December 1st at the latest. So lots coming up in about another week or so. But how about you?
Well, Emmanuel book. Same phase as you, going through first and second round edits on things. But since tonight's kind of a sword and planet night, I did want to give a shout out to one of my favorite sword and planet movies is finally getting its comic book release after 50 years. But we talked about this a long time ago. But your Hunter from the Future.
all right, that is awesome.
So it came out back in Argentina back in the 70s, and the Italian movie was based on it, but it's finally started to get an English translation. So it's going to be 4 issues. Issue 1 came out late August, early September. I didn't even know about it. I just happened upon it randomly on Facebook. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta get it. So expect a write-up from me comparing the comic book version to the film version. Issue issue 1 basically covers the first 30 minutes of the film. It is old school. It is it looks like a 70s, it's Argentinian, but it looks like a 70s Euro comic. But so far, thumbs up. I'm digging it. It's just interesting to see the comic book origins of yore, and also how very much alike they are and different. Plot wise, spot on. Tonality, that's a different story. But I'll be putting a little write up about this
Awesome.
and the other issues come out. So, yore, we love yore.
So on the subject of comic books, thank you again, Hercules, for sending me the Assassin's Creed
Glad you liked it.
novel. That was a lot of fun to read. And Nick and I recently went to one of the local comic book stores, and we're hoping to kind of get back into having a local hangout and place to go and get our comic books. So with that in mind, and remembering the fact that we've had conversations, there is a new Moon Knight.
Oh,
And
wow. Awesome.
yeah, Phases of Moon Knight from Marvel. This happens to be a variant cover. I did read it, enjoyed it. It's basically kind of taking an early look at Moon Knight. This is not Mark Spector on the cover. This is someone else who was Moon Knight before Mark Spector.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, so I think gonna have to have a revisit of Moon Knight down the road, Hercules, so we can
Looking forward to it.
have a conversation about the continuing adventures of Moon Knight and how they keep working with the IP. There is another Moon Knight series coming out, and I cannot remember it right off. I think it's Vengeance of Moon Knight. So I think that takes place before this book. I think it's coming out as a trade paperback in December. And then this is the most recent series. So definitely we'll have some things to talk about Moon Knight in the coming months since there's stuff going on.
And Deathstalker is out in comic. They've had 3 issues so far, and he appeared in Barbaric. And they're making a movie, a new Deathstalker movie.
I did monies to the Kickstarter of the Deathstalker comic, and I think I got the digital copy of it already. I haven't read it or anything. I know I ordered the physical copy, but I do have the digital copy of Deathstalker. Hopefully it's good. More like Deathstalker 2 than Deathstalker 1.
Makes references to Deathstalker 2 in the other movies, mostly Deathstalker 2, but it's not the same Deathstalker as in Deathstalker 2, nor is it the same as the Deathstalker in Deathstalker 1 and 4 or 3. It's like none of the Deathstalkers. It's a new Deathstalker.
Interesting.
On the quick subject of Deathstalker 2. So because I'm working on an Emmanuel book, Michele and I have been rewatching some of the French Emmanuel films, the official ones. And Emmanuel 5? 5 has they cast, since Sylvia Christel is not being Emmanuel anymore, they cast Monique Gabrielle, who's the princess from Deathstalker 2, taking over the helm of Emmanuel. And this is her demeanor from Deathstalker 2 is very much a part of her and carries over into an Emmanuel where she's very stalker. But so that's all. This it made me think of Deathstalker when we watched that movie. Right. That's Monique Gabrielle for you. We not the greatest actress, but we dig her. I think the only last thing I have is still on the subject of Sword and Planet is I did a whole bunch of comic book reviews like 5 years ago on some Edgar Rice Burroughs, Carson of Venus, and John Carter comics that were getting published at the time. And there's an Edgar Rice Burroughs journal out there called the Panthans Journal. And they're republishing all my reviews. So every month a new journal issue comes out. So nice to see some of my old writing have a new life, a new home. So that's cool. I mean, this has been a slow year at publishing things. So, but an interesting year on seeing things republished. So that's kind of cool.
And it's nice, particularly since I think book reviews, music reviews, and all those type of things have relevance. And we'll probably touch on a little bit about some kind of the retrospective critical reviews of this movie that we'll be talking about at that time, and then also kind of retrospective, and of course how we add to that dialogue regarding this film. So,
and what film is that?
What film is that?
Is it Krull?
It might be.
So tonight we're going to talk about Krull, which, you know, I just realized Krull doesn't have like a second title, not like Krull, you know, the Adventures from Beyond. It's just Krull. Anyway, so tonight we're talking about the Sword and Planet 1983 classic Krull. So just a heads up, if you go to Wikipedia, the plot for Krull stretches this long. I've been able to get it to this big. So because the plot is very lengthy, like Lord of the Rings. All right, so Krull. On the planet Krull, the mysterious spacefaring Black Fortress lands and sends out its armies of slayers to take over the planet. To combat this menace, two rival kingdoms come to an alliance, signaled by the wedding of their respective heirs, Prince Colwyn and Princess Lysa. Their ceremony is cut short when the slayers attack the castle with their laser swords, mortally wounding guards, guests, and royalty, and kidnapping Princess Lysa in the process. The slayers take her back to the Black Fortress, where the evil beast who rules within wants to marry her so he can take over the planet. Lysa, of course, refuses. Prince Colwyn, injured but not out, is revived by the sage-like Ynir. I'm going to mispronounce some of these names. Colwyn wants to travel to the Black Fortress post-haste to rescue Lysa. However, Ynir says Colwyn needs a powerful weapon in order to even stand a chance against the beast. The glaive. Colwyn and Ynir travel to a mountain with a near vertical cliffs, and Colwyn is able to climb inside successfully. In a cave at the top, he finds the glaive submerged in lava, which he sticks his hand to retrieve. Weapon in hand, Colwyn now needs men and needs to learn the location of the Black Fortress. In his adventures, and I've got a list here.
Colwyn, that's how you dealt with that.
I had to condense the plot to a bulleted list. Colwyn convinces a band of bandits to join his cause, encounters a clumsy shapeshifter who also allies up, befriends a Cyclops, visits a blind seer and escorts him to a swamp where the seer is in turn killed by a doppelganger, attempts to be seduced by a lady under the spell of the beast, Ynir only, this is not Colwyn's adventure, visits the lair of a crystal spider where he meets his old betrothed, and finally rides super horses who have flaming hooves. Eventually, Colwyn and company make it to the Black Fortress. Rael the Cyclops sacrifices himself to keep a cave door open so Colwyn and his band can pass through. Inside, many skirmishes with slayers happen, and the group eventually gets separated. Torquil, the bandit leader, and some of his men get trapped in a room with closing walls covered in spikes. Ergo, the shapeshifter, turns into a tiger and attacks the slayers, but becomes injured. Colwyn finds the prison of Lysa and uses the glaive to break it open. The beast attacks Colwyn, and he throws the glaive at it, which injures the monster, but does not stop him. Instead, the power of true love stops him, and Lysa empowers Colwyn with love so he could shoot love fire out of his hand, which toasts the beast and causes the fortress to crumble. Everyone who is still alive escapes. The end.
Wow.
You want to watch this movie again, don't you?
Of course I do.
So Michele, overall, what was your general impression of Krull?
And the glaive.
And the glaive.
Okay, so I will make it brief and as quick as possible. But I'm going to caveat what I'm going to say with the fact that Nick and I have watched a lot of sword and sorcery, sword and planet movies. There's been good. There's been a lot of bad.
How much bad?
A lot of bad.
A lot of bad. More bad than good?
Usually. Yeah. So, it's been great conversations. Coming from that point of having seen quite a few films, I came into watching this film with kind of low expectations, figuring I'm going to get pretty low budget, a lot of crappy special effects, and pretty unmemorable. And having watched this film, which turned out to be 2 hours long,
we were expecting like an 86-minute Roger Corman directed VHS type movie.
Exactly. That's what we were expecting. I will say, I thoroughly enjoyed this film, given my caveats before saying that I did really enjoy this film. I wish I had seen it back in the day, but I'm glad that Nick and I watched it a few days ago, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And how about you?
So my caveat, despite the fact that this is a 2-hour movie and it takes 1 hour and 45 minutes before he finally uses the glaive, this movie ruled. uh, aside from lack of hot glaive action, I again, Krull. I had the soundtrack to Krull actually, but I'd never seen it. I've known of it. I've seen it referenced. I've seen it parodied.
It has been parodied quite a bit and
Yeah.
referenced quite a bit in pop culture.
But
so I'm really shocked that I've not seen this film before.
I've missed out. This looks like the type of film that had I known better, I should have caught like on VHS or like HBO in the 90s and probably would have like loved it as much as Beastmaster. So but even though they heavily advertise the glaive, it's only in the movie for 15 minutes.
Is it even on the cover?
It is on the cover. He's shooting lasers from it, even though that doesn't happen in
okay.
the film.
Oh, okay.
But it is on the cover.
Some creative license
So
there.
there's some,
yeah.
but that's cool though. The cover sells me, but anyway, so we both were enthralled by Krull. This is Krull with an R, not Kull the Conqueror, the Kevin Sorbo film in the 90s. I sometimes have forgot to attach that R in it. But I enjoyed it. So I guess
should we unpack it a bit?
Let's unpack it a bit. So I've been calling this movie a Sword and Planet. Actually, yeah, I'll go with it. A Sword and Planet movie. It's not like a planetary romance film like the John Carter stuff would be, but in the 80s there was quite a bit of let's put fantasy in space and on another planet. So like yeah, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe film. Yor to some extent. I think Yor takes place on a different planet. That's just me though. The Lou Ferrigno Hercules, a heavy metal movie, Princess Warrior. It's a deep cut if anyone's seen that film. And so Krull is kind of like, I want to say like the next to maybe He-Man in terms of production, but like one of the standout films of the 80s. Let's do sword and sorcery and space film. So with that regard, I kind of consider it a Sword and Planet film.
Okay. I think sword and sorcery myself, because I mean, even though it's another planet, I feel like there's some amount of sorcery, and I think the mythology that's referenced within the film that helps to kind of world build Krull as well as the characters in the film. So I would tend to focus it more towards sword and sorcery, but I think that either one or a combination of both is appropriate.
You know, it's got its magic, but it's weird. It's a combination of like telekinetic power, magic power, and high tech, and it all kind of merges together. Which, you know, I think back in the 70s and 80s, that kind of thing was done a lot, you know, especially in comic books where you can have like a really wacky setting that, you know, like a space western or a space fantasy films where, you know, high tech and low tech kind of meet together.
Well, and even Star Wars, you know, with the little furry guys in the forest, the Ewoks in the forest, you know, how that's kind of low tech and they're fighting. It's like having guerrilla warfare, you know, and the natives having, you know, the upper hand, even though they really don't have the technology.
No, this is definitely a post-Star Wars film. It's not quite like knocking off Star Wars as some other films like Battle Beyond the Stars would be, but you could see there's a Star Wars influence. You know, there's not quite stormtroopers, but there are like evil aliens in armor. They don't have blasters, but they have like swords that shoot lasers. The opening sequence is totally the first Star Wars film, except instead of an Imperial class Star Destroyer rumbling, it's a mountain basically, which
it's the Black Fortress.
It's the Black Fortress, but you know, it's the way it's filmed. You know, it is copying the Star Destroyer coming in, but it makes me think of like later on, like disaster films, you know, like a Roland Emmerich type film where like here comes the giant comet on the, you know, planet, but it's,
yes,
you know, it has that feeling, maybe a little bit of Independence Day, a little bit of Armageddon or Deep Impact, you know, the ominous big chunk of space rock that happens to be a really, girl, come on.
You didn't need those, did you?
Yeah, I did. Give me.
Sorry, our mascot Cecily is readjusted and had to lay on his notes now.
She's editing.
Oh, she's a good girl. One other thing I did want to bring up about genre real quick, sword and planety type stuff is, you know, sword and sandal, sorcery and planet. We always talk about in sword and sandal here, like where the hero, you know, gets their power from within. You know, the strong man is strong, you know, weapons and stuff are an extension of himself. The sword and planet genre is like the opposite of that. Characters get their strength from external places. So like if you take a Burroughsian stance, you know, you have like a John Carter who gets his powers from being on, you know, Mars, you know, it's the planet that gives him the power. Same with Lynn Carter's Jandar of Callisto, Escape from Ganymede and all that stuff. So the characters themselves aren't strong per se. It's the planet or the moon that gives them the power. So you take that away, they're less powerful. But then on the other hand, you also have the more sword and sorcery sword and planet, where maybe the planet doesn't give the person a power, but like their weapon does. You know, He-Man is the big example of that with his sword. But in Krull, he gets his power from the glaive, even though he doesn't use it until the last 15 minutes of the film. I mean, he's like a competent swordsman, and you know, he uses his wits mostly in the film, the lead character, you know, like the Wendover bandits and stuff. But it's at the end of the film that moment where he draws the glaive to the moment that, you know, true love conquers all, that he could do all the cool stuff with the glaive, shatter prisons and fling it and call it back and all that cool stuff. So that's kind of like, without it, you know, he's still a skilled person, but it's the glaive that, you know, puts him exceptional, much like either a planet does in planetary romance genre or an artifact sword like in He-Man.
Yeah, it's interesting with regards to Colwyn and the fact with this glaive that's supposed to be, you know, through the ages, it's been prophesized, you know, that this glaive exists and it's for one person to, you know, come and be able to get and, you know, hold sway over the enemies. And when he gets it, great. Now we're like, okay, we're off to the Black Fortress. But what's interesting about the film is the Black Fortress moves every sunrise, which is an interesting twist to the narrative because you don't know where the fortress is going to appear the next morning. So that does help kind of push the narrative that they have to go to different places to try to seek out the answer of where the fortress is going to be from one day to the next. And that does help. And I think that kind of got lost a little bit with like critics and with retrospective is the fact that that's actually an interesting plot device to help bring in and build the world of Krull while also helping us to gain more appreciation for the various characters. This is not
two-dimensional. And locations.
Yeah, you know, yes, as well as locations. But with Colwyn, and you know, something Nick and I talked about a little bit before this episode, the fact that Colwyn is you know, an average fellow He is not a huge strong man like Mark Singer was when he was in Beastmaster or Arnie in Conan. But at one point, I think he has his shirt off or something, and you can see he's actually pretty buff. But you know, you don't usually see that, and they didn't put a lot of that on display. And
that's the type of buff that you see nowadays, like Hugh Jackman and Wolverine, where he's buff, but he's not like bodybuilding buff, but he's like muscular buff that everything is accentuated. And so yeah, the guy who plays Colwyn has there's a shot for the ladies in there where he's being revived at the castle and his shirt is open and you can see his ribs, 6'8", whatever pack he's got.
I think it was about 6. But the other thing about him is that, as Nick said, he has the glaive, but he doesn't use it for most of the film. So his interaction with others is through his ability to actually be a people person and talk with them, be able to relate and to connect with them. And I think that's also a little different.
And he gets called out on that too. If you remember, right when after he gets the glaive, he like says something to the old man. He's like, "There is a kingly attribute that you have yet to learn, and that's treating people with respect or something."
Yeah, and so thereafter he ends up building rapport, and I mean, I think that shows that that's a good leader. Whether he has a glaive or not, those are going to be important attributes down the road. Obviously, at the end of the film, he's not able to retrieve the glaive from the beast. So, he has to move forward without it. And obviously he's up to the task because he spent most of the movie with the glaive hanging on his belt.
So earlier you said about the glaive that it's like this weapon that's ancient and it's destined for one person to pluck it up. What does that sound like?
Well, like King Arthur, the sword and the stone.
There's a big King Arthur element to this film for sure. It's basically a little bit of Space King Arthur, where Colwyn is Arthur, the old man is Merlin. More so than the shapeshifter, because Merlin's wise. He picks up his knights as he goes. So there's it is a very Matter of Britain type film. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on Matter of Britain at all, but there is a huge influence of Arthurian legend in this film that's been
some of my favorite.
Yeah. And also for other literary stuff, there's a shade of Romeo and Juliet in that. It's only in the very beginning, there's two kingdoms that are fighting each other, and the prince and the princess love each other, which is kind of a little bit of Romeo Juliet, but that's kind of scrapped after 10 minutes for it to become a normal fantasy film. But there's a little bit of that.
Well, and I think it also, we end up spending the entire movie learning more about Colwyn as well as Lissa. And Lissa is, and I'm sure we'll do a little more talking about the characters here in a bit, but they are very strong individuals themselves, because they do have to become, Colwyn obviously has to carry the movie and become the hero, while Lissa has to be able to put off the beast, and the beast is trying to marry her so that way he can take the power, because she's the one with this inherent flame that she gives to the person that she chooses as her husband. So there's good reason why the beast actually really wants to have her choose him. And so he is competition for trying to get some of that magic, which again adds an interesting element and storytelling to this film.
Now, on the subject of characters, we've been talking about Colwyn a lot, but I think anyone who's seen Krull is probably going to think that the standout character is the Cyclops. The Cyclops is pretty rocking. So usually Cyclopses are bad guys. He's a good guy in this film. He actually has a lot in common with, if anyone's seen the Rock version of Hercules, Ian McShane's character in that, Amphiaraus, which I totally butchered, but it's a real mythological person. Ian McShane's character, he thinks he's able to see his own death, and so through the movie he's going, he predicts his own death, and then finally when his death scene comes, he's like, all right, I'm prepared to die, and then Hercules like steps in and like catches I can't remember what happens, but like catches the arrow or stops the spear. He's like, not today, friend. He's like, oh, so he gets kind of cheated out of his death. It's kind of a little comedic thing. That does not happen to the Cyclops. So the Cyclops dies, but he has like this. If there is weak stuff in the movie, there is some like patchwork in its narrative. And the Cyclops, like he's supposed to be able to see his deaths, and so the sequence where they get the super horses, he like stays behind, and we're like, oh, he's gonna have a scene by himself. There's gonna be some slayers that come out after he did the horses and kill him. That doesn't happen. Instead, he he just like waits a bit and then gets on the horses and then meets people at the Black Fortress where he dies. I'm like, he could have just done that instead. Basically, the Cyclops is a Deus Ex Machina anytime he shows up. He's catching spears that, are supposed to kill everyone and save the day at the end. But aside from his fake out death scene, he rules. And he also looks good for like early 80s practical special effects to make a Cyclops.
Yeah, although I will tell you that there was definitely times in parts of the film where I could tell that the actor couldn't see what was going on. Like he'd be kind of like putting his hand down to get whatever, and you could kind of see that he obviously couldn't see. And I did read that the way that the effects were done, he had very narrow vision. He couldn't see a whole lot when he was in the makeup. And I guess the swamp scene was particularly difficult to shoot and for him to be able to see. And just generally, all the actors had kind of a bit of a struggle and challenge with that part of the movie. What I was going to say is that Cyclops, they do mention in there that if he doesn't accept his fate, basically his death, that it will be even worse. So
I thought it was he's just going to feel a lot of pain. It'll be very painful for him. So
yeah, I think that that's kind of the gist of it. And I think he decided, screw it, I'm going to go help my friends.
Which slightly better written, you could play that out like, oh my God, the Cyclops has returned. And he's like, oh my God, I'm in so much pain, but I'm here to save the day for one last final act or whatever. And that would have closed the little narrative loop instead of the fake out death scene.
Yeah, so I think, if there's a few cons to this film, and I would say that is one spot where it's kind of a missed opportunity and kind of a misstep on being able to close the loop, like you said, on that part of the character arc.
If anything, that's just kind of indicative, if is a major flaw of the film, is that it is trying to do everything where, you can have nowadays like a 3-hour plus, Lord of the Rings film, and that's fine. You couldn't really do that in the 80s. So it's really trying to squish a Lord of the Rings journey into a 2-hour film where it probably, I'd say it's one of those films I could have done with another half an hour. You could have spent that half an hour closing some of these narrative loops, maybe doing a little bit more character development on Lysa, so she's not just a damsel in distress the entire time. Beef up a couple other things, but I think it's just because the movie is just ambitious and it just had so much plot going on that this needed to be smoothed over. And I heard it like there's a lot of writing revisions and stuff going on. So it sounds like a lot of stuff went into the writing stew pot.
Yeah, and I think that along with that, the fact that they didn't have really a solidified screenplay at the time they started shooting was also kind of a challenge. Because you didn't have complete focus. There was production issues. So again, that's another kind of con to this film, is that if they had solidified their screenplay, had their story set, and then that would have led, instead of like some of the sets that were built prior to getting the screenplay kind of set, then it would have probably been more cohesive and you would have had better transitions. But I do think I would tend to agree. I think if they had had a little more time, or maybe if they just tightened up the storytelling, then I think it would have been even a stronger film. But given everything that was going on behind the scenes to get it made, as well as, you know, a limited budget. I mean, I think it was like 15 or no, I think it was near 30 million. That wasn't a lot.
Really? That sounds like a lot for a back then film.
Yeah, I think it was about 30.
That's still quite
27 to 30 million. And I don't remember. I meant to look to see what Excalibur cost.
Yeah, this is definitely a post-Excalibur film.
Yeah. But I still think it, you know, given everything going on behind the scenes, and then, you know, what they were doing on screen as far as with the various actors, I still think it holds together. But I would agree with you about Cyclops. He was a very good character, and you actually showed me in the last couple of days some sort of homage to Cyclops.
So I think, yeah, we'll have to take a little tangent break here. So not next month, but the month after, for scholars, we're probably going to watch and discuss a movie called Gentlemen Broncos. Now, why would we talk about a movie with a title like Gentlemen Broncos? Because it's about a writer who writes really bad Lynn Carter style science fiction. And the movie, apparently, when it cuts to scenes showing what's going on in the books, it's very Krullish. There's like the Cyclops from Krull, like on dune buggies and stuff riding around. And so, you know, I'm like, oh my God, that's totally Krull. So we will be talking about Gentlemen Broncos and probably its Krull influence in November.
Yeah.
On the one other subject of it, because we talk about Krull has been a wide-reaching influence. And one of the things that just oblivious at the time was about 15 years ago, we played a little game called Dark Sector.
Yes.
What is that on the cover?
Yep.
A glaive.
Yeah.
A glaive, correct.
They even call it a glaive. So this was a game that we played way back in the 2000s. It's about a CIA agent who's like in Eastern Europe trying to stop like a bio agent from getting unleashed, and the bio agent. I think that's your game.
Oh wow.
But like he's trying to stop a bio terrorist thing, but he gets like the bio virus, whatever, infected on him, and it warps his hand, and so he when his hand's warped, it makes these tendrils and stuff come out, and it makes a glaive, and he can. You know, it looks like the glaive from Krull, but like maybe covered like in a black tar and a bit more fleshy. But he does the same thing. That's the key like mechanic of the game is take cover, pop out from cover, you know, throw your glaive, knock out 10 people, bring it back, and you know, repeat, rinse, repeat. So this is basically modern day Krull, but instead of a space planet setting, it's Eastern Europe. But this is Krull, basically. So didn't know it at the time, but you know, watching Krull, like, oh my God, that's this game. So this game is definitely inspired by Krull, Gentlemen Broncos, whole bunch of other stuff as well, and the probably also inspired by is the screenwriter, because we're talking about a little bit of issue with the plot trying to do too much. The screenwriter for this film. I have his name right now. Stanford Sherman is the same guy who a year later would write Ice Pirates.
And we've talked about that too.
Yeah,
so go back and check out that episode.
And if I recall, we enjoyed Ice Pirates.
We did.
Probably for the same reasons we enjoyed Krull.
It was kind of an insane, crazy narrative storytelling, but it was a lot of fun.
If you squint, you can see some overlap between Krull and Ice Pirates. Basically, swashbuckling in space. Both narratives are very big on let's have a a Zorro Robin Hood type character swing around on chandeliers or whatever, and a lot of folks. And that's in both films, even though they take place on other planets where there's space or high tech or whatever. They got to get their swashbuckling in. And the interesting thing is, this was, I'm going to say, the early 80s was a dead time for swashbuckling, because you didn't have, I mean, Zorro was dormant, Robin Hood was dormant. Robin Hood wouldn't come back until Kevin Costner. Zorro wouldn't come back until Antonio Banderas. Pirate films wouldn't come back until the Johnny Depp films. So, you know, swashbuckling was kind of like a dead genre in the 80s.
What's interesting is that there were those kind of films, but they were definitely like latter 70s. Like I'm thinking Robert Shaw had a swashbuckling film, and I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, 70s, we did have a handful of Three Musketeers films.
Yes, was like Michael York,
and Ian McShane, which
Richard Chamberlain, and yeah.
But that was 70s. Yeah, I think because post Star Wars.
Because we had all the teenage films in the 80s.
And you wanted more high-techy stuff, even though Star Wars brought us lightsabers. That's not quite swashbuckling, but you know, there's that agility, that, you know, using the environment to swing around and have a bit of bravado that comes with the swashbuckling fighting that you wouldn't see like in a chivalrous medieval movie, for instance, where it's just you know, swordplay.
Well, and what's interesting too about that is that you still had kind of your hero look like an average looking fellow before you really got into the hyper masculinity look of like Arnie and Conan, which set off a whole new kind of masculinity identity type crisis going on. Along with what you were saying with regards to the writer, I think one of the positives about this film is kind of the pedigree behind the camera. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, or just kind of connect a few of those. One being the director, Peter Yates. He also directed another film that I very much liked, even though there was like 6 or 8 hubcaps that came off the car.
Okay, wait, hold on. I knew you were going to bring that up. Side tangent. When we met, we used to do volunteer work at an independent cinema in Tacoma. And I think this was there. They had like a trivia night. And one of the questions was, you know, how many hubcaps fall off the car in Bullet? I hadn't seen Bullet. Michele had seen Bullet. I'm sitting there like, well, obviously a car only has 4 wheels. It can't be greater than 4. And the answer turned out to be like a lot.
I think it was 6 or 8. I think it was probably 6. But
it was more hubcaps came off the car than physically possible.
Yeah. But he was the director of Bullet from 1968. And because he was a British director, he actually worked with Terrence Young and Guy Hamilton, which has the whole James Bond link that I've studied in the past.
Oh, there's more James Bond link in this
one. Well, yes, there is. But that I'm just generally speaking. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the writer. The cinematography was done by Peter Schalowski, I guess. He did the Rocky Picture Horror Show.
Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't write out the complete title. Empire Strikes Back. And then he also did several collaborations with David Cronenberg, starting with Dead Ringers, going through like Eastern Promises. So much more recent work as well. The film was edited by Ray Lovejoy, who was the assistant editor for Lawrence of Arabia, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Aliens, and Tim Burton's Batman.
So a lot of people that worked on epics were a part of Krull.
Yeah. And then, of course, as you brought up the music, that was James Horner, who obviously had worked on Titanic, Field of Dreams, Apollo 13, and Braveheart. So there's a lot of pedigree behind the scenes that went into this film, which makes it kind of epic. And the fact that, you know, for some of these were early in their career that would influence their work down the road.
And who are two actors who got their start in Krull?
Well, Liam Neeson.
So Mr. Taken, who was considered for James Bond at one point. So there's
yes, but he did do Excalibur before this. But again, you know, the fact that he was in another fantasy film that was, you know, pretty big deal. And the other Bond is Robbie Coltrane, who most people are going to think of him from the Harry Potter, but he was also in James Bond,
GoldenEye, and the World Is Not a No. Yeah, World's Not Enough.
And then he was also, I think he voiced one of the video games.
Probably.
I think he also did voice. And additionally, you know, because it was a British film, it was filmed at Pinewood Studios. So that, again, another tie to 007. And in fact, the swamp scene was, that set was set up in Pinewood Studios. And of course, you had the London Symphony backing up James Horner. So additionally, we talked briefly about locales, and I just want to say that it was shot, the exteriors anyway, Italy, Spain, and England. So it was kind of funny because I was mentioning to Nick, I thought that the Barbarians, I was sure kind of some of those early scenes were probably shot in the same place.
Perhaps.
And then
I could probably IMDb that to confirm it.
Yeah.
The only thing that would have been for sure is that they shot those waterfalls.
I know. We were waiting for the Italian waterfalls, actually. Yeah.
You know
it
what?
Didn't happen though.
The swamp sequence makes me think of, in retrospect, a movie that came out a couple years later, and that would have been Never Ending Story, where the kid's trying to bring the horse across.
Oh, don't remind me. No. That makes me very sad.
Yeah, and well, this movie, a couple people get tossed in the swamp. Yeah. Let's see what else we got. And this is just an observation. It's no real deep profoundness here. Maybe there is. I don't know. There's a lot of clairvoyancy in this film. Like, so a lot of people are capable of scrying and looking at things. So like the Beast is able to scry on Colwyn. Like he shows him like when a lady's trying to seduce him. There's the blind seer. There's the widow of the web. And then the Cyclops can see his own death. There's just a lot of like, not just like one character. It's like, you know, like a witch or something that says everything. There's like multiple characters in this film that are able to like scry and see the future and stuff. And I mean, again, this is an observation in this type of film where, you know, there's magic and shape-shifting and laser swords and apparently like psionic or telekinetic powers as well. Just especially since a good chunk of their quest is going after these people that can see things because they know where the Black Fortress will be. You know what? I just realized that, my God, you could totally have like fixed this plot. Okay, the Cyclops fake out death, if that didn't happen, and the Cyclops knew he was going to die in the Black Fortress, that means he knows where the Black Fortress was going to be. So they could have, in theory, asked him, I mean, they wouldn't know to ask him, but the Cyclops have been like, hey, where's the Black Fortress going to pop up? Oh, in the desert, because that's where I'm going to die. That could have saved them like 2 trips. They take a trip to the seer, then take the seer to the swamp, and then they're like, oh, we messed this mission up, so we got to go to the cave of the crystal spider. I mean, that's part of the epic journey here, the hero's journey, what makes this epic. But you could have probably cut a lot of that out. The Cyclops just spoke up and said, 3 days are going to be in the desert, and that's where I die. So let's head there.
Yeah, and in fact, that it's funny that you bring that fact up because that was one of the critics mentioned the fact that there seemed to be, well, we can go here. They're the only ones that are going to know. And then that gets fouled up. And then someone else says, oh, well, if we go here, we can find out that information. And so that was a criticism, but I mean, I think
I take it as part of the journey.
I do too. And I do feel, yes, the writing could have been better with regards to that. And maybe there could have been a better way to kind of link all of that together. But it was an interesting way to help build, again, like I said early on, you know, the mythology, the world, the characters, and what they're going through.
You know, that the swamp scene ate at me for a little bit, because I'm like, you know, they go there and they basically fail their mission. You know, they take the seer to the swamp, but the seer dies. It's like, well, why did you have to go to the swamp in the first place then? You could have written that a bit better. But then I'm reminded of watching Lord of the Rings. You know, the Fellowship like tries to like go to point A from point B, and they're like crossing like the snowy mountains, and then someone speaks up and says, "This is a stupid idea. We should probably go a different route." And they're like, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." And so they go a different route. That's how I kind of took it, is that's the journey. You make mistakes, you do your side quests, you do your fetch quests. I know when I play a video game, if I'm in the dungeon, I go down every bad corridor first because there could be treasure down it. So when I take that perspective, I'm like, Krull's just, you know, guy on an adventure doing all the side quests.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, you know, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that there was a lot of criticism about the writing and about how the movie's put together. But I do really think that, you know, stop and think about how the movie is put together, and the fact that many of our video games are exactly set up that way, and that's part of the journey. Then this really does make more sense, and it kind of fits, and it makes it epic. How many films have we watched where we're like, we don't give a darn about the supporting characters, and sometimes not even the main characters, because there hasn't been character development. This film does not lack some character development, and we do care about when, you know, one of them is killed off.
Well, and you brought this up before we started talking. It's like aside from the main character Colwyn, every like secondary character like has their own like little mini quest, and some of them fail it and some of them succeed, but they all have a something else going on from them. They all have a something else that they're going to gain or achieve or do by joining up with Colwyn on his quest. The shapeshifter starts off as kind of like a braggart and kind of foolish. And even though at the end he's still foolish, he's matured as he's partnered up with the little kid of the seer. The leader of the bandits, you know, he won't take his shackles off because he's kind of, that's part of my identity. I will take him off when this quest is over, and when the quest is over, he goes from being leader of the bandits to leader of the kingdom. The old man, the sage guy, gets closure with visiting the widow of the web and finding out he had a son. And so it's like, even Liam Neeson's character, you know, he should be just kind of a background thug type character. You know, he has an arc of, he has multiple wives, and you know, he kind of like, who do I love and all that stuff. And, you know, he dies kind of tragically, but you know, he has his end. So even the background, secondary and thirdary characters all seem to have a something else going on, and that's what I think gives the movie a bit more weight to it. Because if you take that out, like in less capable hands, this should just be a generic good versus evil film. Well, let me go rescue. I'm a dashing guy. Let me go rescue the damsel in distress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do think that helps this movie be more memorable, because I think that, you know, as you've made comparisons with Lord of the Rings, we all remember Sean Bean's death, you know.
Sean Bean.
Yeah, and other deaths that occur. And I think that, you know, Krull is a pretty good film for characters. We did talk some about Prince Colwyn, but I do want to say that I think Princess Lissa has a strength too. She is a damsel in distress, but she chooses very early on to not cave into the wants of the beast, and where other women might be.
You should point out real quick, even though she's captive, she's not restrained. Usually you have a villain that's the, you know, the mustache twirling, and the damsel's like, shackled or roped up or something. She actually has free reign in the prog rock inspired, Black Fortress, with the idea that, she can go wherever she wants and eventually maybe hopefully fall in love with the beast. So she's there's some, I'm going to say, agency to her captivity a little bit.
Yeah, and she never, even when the beast tries to show her that Colin is two-timing her, so to speak.
He's not really there.
He's not really, but she refuses and says that love is stronger than the power that he wants to give her if she chooses him as her husband. So there's more to her than what meets the eye, and that's something that I do like about her. Even her 80s hair.
She's got the frizzy, curly Kelly LeBrock all the way down hair for sure. What? That's like her hair is really the only 80s thing in the film, really. It doesn't, I know it's an 80s film, but it doesn't feel like the 80s. Kind of like how Star Wars, even though it's a 70s film, the only thing that makes Star Wars feel like the 70s is the sideburns on the Imperial officers. It's like everything else outside that film just looks better than the period it was made in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I was just checking my notes, I feel like the only thing that really is dated is some of the effects. I mean, obviously you can tell that they're not the best effects, but at the time they would have been really, contemporary, in keeping with contemporary effects that were going on in the various movies. We didn't talk about it much other than to say that they had weapons that shot lasers, and then at the other end, I think they were kind of like a spear, and that's the Slayers. Those were kind of interesting, and I think that's a little bit of a missed story opportunity, because when they would be killed, what would come out of them is like this worm thing that would then go back into the ground. And that was something that, didn't really get explored. It wasn't kind of like talked about or anything. So I think that might have been an interesting story point.
There's some strands in this movie that would be cooler to dive into if you could. I know when I saw that, I'm like, I've seen that before in a movie where like an alien race is like kind of small and parasitic and they take over someone else. Be it
Star
Slither.
Trek did that.
Star Trek.
Next Generation. Yeah.
See, I was thinking Slither.
Well, Star Trek, The Next Generation did that. Was it Worf and Data? I don't remember the two. Yeah.
They took over the Federation and they dropped the storyline. So you never have, the first season ends with these worms and everybody of importance, and then they never talk about it again.
Yeah. So, it's something that was used, and I think even in the original Star Trek series, they had some sort of little worm parasite.
It was around Khan, I think, or one of those movies that had the worms going people's ears. And
yeah, well, and I was remembering back that there was a James Gardner film set in Texas where these little fireworms came up out of the earth and they'd go. I remember seeing it, scared me half to death. I couldn't sleep that night. I was having nightmares, but they would go, the little worms would go in the ears and they'd kill people. It was gruesome. But anyway, but we're talking about Krull.
Well, hold on. One Star Trek thing. I know we got to wrap up here in a minute, but just real quick. In the very beginning, when Colwyn is climbing the mountain by himself with no gear, I actually thought it reminded me of Kirk climbing the mountain at the beginning of Star Trek V: Final Frontier, because Shatner is like trying to freehand climb Yosemite Mountain or whatever it is, and so like, oh, well, I guess Colwyn did that, 5 years earlier.
I think there's a lot of
influence.
Yeah, Krull influenced a lot of things, and that was part of the point I was trying to make with some of the pedigree behind the camera. But just more generally, I think this is it. I was reading the notes in Wikipedia, and like I said, there's a lot of mixed reviews and kind of mostly negative reviews. But I do think that it did get a cult following, and I'm definitely a cult follower now. So
this is the type of movie that should be expanded universe right now. You know, the movie ends at the cliffhanger. Their kid is going to take over the galaxy. That's your movie now. Instead of doing Beetlejuice, or Zootopia 10 or whatever, you could do Krull 2, Son of Krull.
Why did you do that?
Yeah, you know, not to get off on another tangent, but this is one of those movies. Why isn't there a second one? Although I will say that's in here in the Wikipedia. Apparently, the film rights have been sold, and so there may be a remake coming.
You don't need a remake, Krull. You can build off of it. They left the movie open for. Never mind.
And it could be even better, you know, depending. I think it's J.J. Abrams that is attached to it. Yeah. So, you know, hey, he brought Star Trek back, so maybe he'll bring Krull back.
That'd be awesome. I don't remember Krull. I saw it so long ago when it first came out, and then I got it on DVD when it first came out. But I remember the Cyclops being a good guy, and that influenced all the campaigns I've done with role-playing and interactive storytelling, because there are good guy Cyclopses also. So they're not just brutish monsters throwing rocks and being mean to sailors.
So I will say it was reported back in the fall of 2023 that Warner Brothers had acquired the rights to the film to produce a remake directed by J.J. Abrams. That was according to Giant Freaking Robot.
A reputable source.
A reputable source. So anyway. But that is cool about Cyclops because, like you said, usually they're a bad guy. So again, kind of doing a flip. One of the other points that I was reading about is doppelgangers. You don't get that a whole lot. So, you know, we had a little bit of doppelganger activity in the film as well. So I think there's a lot to commend about this film. And I would say that if any of our watchers, listeners haven't seen it, definitely take a moment, take 2 hours, and watch the film.
Yeah, I think last point, the high note is recommended. Krull ruled. Just it needed to deliver a more glaive action.
Yeah.
1 hour 40. I timed it. I paused the movie to look at how much time elapsed before he whipped out that glaive.
And then he had to kind of rant a little bit about that for a couple minutes, and then we resumed the film. So just fair warning.
At the beginning of the film, he gets the glaive, and the guy's like, no, don't take that out now. You'll know when to use it. I'm like, but he's got to practice with it. He's got to get to know the weapon. Yeah, whatever.
It's inherent.
He trusts his feelings.
He'll just know. But anyway, that I think concludes our discussion of Krull. And with that, Hercules, we are going to pass the torch back to you.
I take the torch gladly, and I thank you for an excellent hour. And how can people enter the world of the Scholars from the Edge of Time and the HP Lovecast and lots and lots of books and portals you have to your wonderful world?
Well, real quick for me, I do have a website, michelebritany.com. I am hoping to get it a little more up to date in the coming days, weeks, whatever. But I do have an author page as well on Amazon where you can go to see what I have going on. Additionally, with HP Lovecast, we do have a Facebook page. We have Instagram. We just recently discussed Glorious, a film from 2023. And we had a very lively conversation about that. So check that out. And then Nick, who is the definitely social media guru of this partnership, can tell you a bit more on what he has to offer.
Yeah, I'm at nickdiak.com. Links to all the social media I'm on. My writing is there, so stay tuned for an article on your That's an easy way to get to me. And if you need to get a hold of Michele, you can get to Michele through me there as well. All of our podcasts are listed there. All of our Scholars from the Edge of Time is listed there. So we're accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you again. That was wonderful. Now I need to dig up the movie. I know I have it somewhere and watch it again. If not, it might be streaming on Tubi.
It might be.
Well, thank you and good night. And this will be up tomorrow sometime.
Well, it's good to see you, sir, and all the listeners. We'll see you all next month.
See you next month. And again, thank you.